We're going to jump right in and take a look at a 4.5 billion yen pension fund. We're going to explore what it is, how it really works, and what it tells us about a much, much bigger story.
So, let's start with this number, 4.5 billion yen. That's roughly the annual contribution income for a private pension fund here in Japan called the Hagukumi Fund. And yeah, that is a whole lot of money flowing in year after year.
But what is this fund really? I mean, on the surface, sure, it's a retirement plan. But when you start to peel back the layers, you find a much more complicated picture. And that's the mystery we're going to unravel right now.
All right, so to get started, we've got to pop the hood. You know, the best way to really understand an organization like this is to just follow the money and see how the whole thing is put together.
And this is where things get really interesting, right off the bat. Just look at this breakdown. Of that 4.5 billion yen coming in, a mind-boggling 87%, that's 3.9 billion, isn't going to investments or even basic administration. It's paid out as outsourcing fees.
So what does that tell you? It means the fund itself is basically functioning as a shell. Almost all of its actual work, we're talking everything from managing members to processing payments, it's all handed off to outside companies.
Now to be precise, let's get the official definition on the table. The Hagukumi Fund is a private corporate pension fund, and it was established under Japan's Defined Benefit Corporate Pension Act.
And this is a really key distinction. Let's be clear about what this is and what it isn't. It is not a public institution paid for by your taxes. Instead, it's a private fund, but it operates with government oversight, and its whole purpose is to supplement the national pension system. It lives in this weird, unique middle ground.
So, if almost all the work is outsourced, it brings up a pretty obvious question, right? Who's actually in charge here, and how much are they getting paid? Well, this is where we run into a major governance blind spot.
I mean, if you were a member of this fund, these are the first questions you'd ask. They seem so simple. Who actually works for the fund, and what are the personnel costs?
But the answer is, well, there is no simple answer. The personnel costs are for all practical purposes invisible. They aren't reported anywhere as their own line item because they're just bundled up inside that massive 3.9 billion yen outsourcing fee we saw earlier.
And because of this setup, it's impossible to answer some really basic, really important questions just by looking at the public documents. Like, how many people work there? What are they making? And the big one, is there any amokadari? You know, the practice of former government officials getting cushy, high-paying jobs. We can't know.
Now, let's be super clear about something. This isn't necessarily some deliberate act of hiding information. The reality is, because the fund isn't a public agency or a publicly traded company, there's just no law that says they have to disclose this level of detail.
But this creates what the source material describes as a design that structurally cannot completely dispel suspicion. See, the problem isn't that we've found any wrongdoing. The problem is that the system is built in a way that just naturally invites doubt. It makes it really hard to build trust.
Okay, so that's the story on the inside. But what about the pressures from the outside world? Let's move on and talk about the serious future headwinds this fund is sailing into.
Look, the whole business model for a fund like this depends on having a growing base of people paying in, especially from small businesses and healthcare. But that model is on a direct collision course with Japan's demographic reality. We're talking a shrinking workforce, more businesses closing than opening, and an aging membership that's going to start taking more money out.
Now, demographics are a huge, slow-moving iceberg, but there's another external risk that could hit the fund a whole lot faster. And that risk? It comes from the tax system. Let's be honest, a huge reason companies and employees join this fund is for the sweet tax benefits. But here's the thing, those benefits aren't guaranteed forever. With Japan's current financial situation, it's not hard to imagine future tax reforms chipping away at those incentives, which could crumble the very foundation of the fund's appeal.
Okay, this brings us to our final section, where we can pull all these different threads together. The fund is operating within the law, no question. But does its structure actually inspire trust?
This table really gives us a nice balanced summary. When it comes to legality, it's lawful. Accounting, there's no evidence of any fraud. But transparency, it's low. And its long-term sustainability? Well, it's definitely under pressure from all those headwinds we just talked about.
So why have we spent all this time digging into this one specific fund? Why does it matter? Well, because this story isn't really just about the Hagukumi Fund.
It's a microcosm.
The issues we've just walked through, the demographic pressures, the heavy reliance on tax policy, those big gaps in transparency, these are the exact same structural challenges facing Japan's entire private pension sector. And that gets us to the core dilemma here. On the one hand, this fund is trying to meet a very real, very urgent need for retirement security. But on the other hand, it's exposed to these huge structural forces that it has no control over. The only way forward for this fund and all the others like it is to be brutally honest about these challenges.
So in the end, the real challenge here isn't about legality, it's about sustainability. And that leaves us with one last question to think about. When a system is facing headwinds this strong, can it really afford anything less than total, absolute transparency?